I had people putting me in touch with agents and publishers, and it was, I mean, I rationally kind of knew that it didn't make sense. I mean, it was tough because I could have really used the money of an advance, but I just knew. And every time I had a conversation about it, I had that sort of feeling inside, like, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. So I knew that I wanted to however possible, make it happen, to go do it the independent way.
Hello again and welcome. I'm Eric Jorgensen and I have some very smart friends. Today, I want you to meet Sarma Melngailis, a former high-profile restaurateur, best known as the founder of One Lucky Duck and Pure Food and Wine in New York, which is a celebrated sort of raw vegan restaurant. My team at Scribe helped her recently publish her memoir, The Girl with the Duck Tattoo. It's a thrilling story of her rise, her public downfall, being in a cult of one, and this mission that she's on to reclaim her narrative and her life. She's most famously known as the bad vegan from the Netflix documentary. So if you've seen that or heard about that, this is her telling her full story rather than being seen through the lens that the Netflix producer chose to put on her. Which we talk about right at the top of the episode. And I think that's super interesting to kind of get the behind the scenes of that. So we talk about how the docuseries worked, her economics, hint, there were none, how it misrepresented the truth, omitted context, and really just framed her in this neutral light when she was objectively a victim. The really interesting creative process of writing a very personal kind of dark memoir. We talk about blending this true crime genre with a psychological thriller with a true memoir. And we talk about her publishing journey. So she recently published with our team at Scribe, and given her past experience with traditional media and traditional publishers and Netflix, chose the path that let her retain maximum editorial control. So we talk about that towards the end. It's a really interesting episode. Sarma's fascinating. She's brilliant. She's lived a really interesting life. And I think it's really fun to kind of dig into that story and show you the inside and the outside of a narrative that's in transition, that everybody thinks they know, but they're still learning from her perspective, everything that happened. If you are considering writing a book, or think a book can help you build your career, build your business, tell your story, control your narrative, please come meet my team. Visit scribemedia.com, schedule a consult, chat with us. If we're not the right fit, we'll happily refer you to somebody else in the industry and just help you find your path forward. We just love helping people write books. Now, I invite you to take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy smart friends arriving at your ears in 3, 2, 1. Sarma, it's a huge pleasure finally to see your book out in the world after what I know is a long, arduous creative effort on your part.
Yes, thank you. No, it feels really good because I spent 8 years working on it. Now that sounds like a lot of time. There were long stretches of time that I wasn't working on it at all, but the process start to finish, I started it 8 years ago. So yeah, it feels good to have it out.
I bet. So let's start with, for people who are unfamiliar with like you, your background, your life story, let's start with a little bit of that. And then I think that'll sort of lead us straight into the decision to write the book.
Sure. Yeah. I had a restaurant and a growing, expanding brand called One Lucky Duck. And the restaurant was called Pure Food and Wine in New York. And if I was somebody else describing it, they would describe it as a celebrity hotspot. I can't say that. That's weird. But it was very popular. We had, we got a lot of press because it was, some say, a bit ahead of its time. But, it was a raw vegan restaurant. But that sounds, like something unappealing, except it was very, very good. And I could say that because, it was my staff and the people working there that were really the creative forces more and more over time. So I'm complimenting them, not myself. But it was a really amazing restaurant. And I was in that position where people kept coming to me about expanding and growing. And having worked in private equity in the past myself, I was very wary of certain types of investors. And then I had just broken up with a 4-year relationship that was a really lovely relationship. And at a weak point in my life, and this man entered and sort of took over my life in a way that was basically as if I was in a cult of one. And people very often don't understand, how does that happen to somebody who's, intelligent, went to a good school, started a business? They don't understand how that happens, but it does happen. And it led to the complete destruction of my business, to it appearing to have been my fault or intentional. And then criminal charges filed, to which I pled guilty because I didn't really have another option. And I spent 4 months at Rikers, and I knew pretty immediately that I would write the story. And I started writing, sort of immediately after I got out of jail. And that's sort of where the 8 years started. So yeah, it's been quite the journey.
It's an incredible hook that's actually where the book starts, isn't it? With your sort of entry into the system.
It starts with me throwing up in a small Tennessee jail, which is where I'd been arrested. And I was having a caffeine withdrawal and, got a migraine and nauseous and throwing up. And everybody around me was withdrawing from hard drugs. But for me, it was just caffeine.
That's quite an indictment of my caffeine habit, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is, and the story now has been like probably you say it's most famously told in the Netflix documentary Bad Vegan?
Yeah. So what happened, I was already in the process of writing the book and had in fact written kind of probably most of a very rough draft. And I was approached about doing a docuseries that was made and then sold to Netflix. And it really did not tell my story correctly at all. So, I mean, people call me gullible or naive, or how could I have believed this con artist man who came into my life? And then, this docuseries is made and I was gullible and naive and just trusting that, if it's a documentary, it's going to be like journalism. They're required to, tell the truth. And apparently they're not. And I think they should be. And so I immediately had to sort of take to my website and online and write a whole thing about why it should be called docutainment or something else, and having to, but it was frustrating. I was put in the position of having to explain myself and be on the defensive and explain all the things they left out and how misleading it was and how, they moved my words around. And, I have all the receipts. So at least I have that on my side. But, that was a really painful experience because even though some people watched the series and were very sympathetic and just thought the ending was confusing but a lot of people watched it, came away thinking that, I am a criminal and a horrible human being. And so then I got the corresponding fire hose of incoming, hate alongside with a lot of incoming sympathy. So somewhere I wrote that it's sort of like getting alternately hugged and punched in the stomach at the same, like you get punched and then hugged and punched and hugged. And that's basically, if I look in any of my incoming messages, that's what that felt like.
That's not an appealing package. I think I'd take no punches and no hugs over the combination.
Yes. So, when the docuseries came out, I had a rough draft written, but it sort of became that much more imperative for me to get the book out, to get my real story out, because I think anybody who reads my book and then watches the series, or watch the series and reads my book, will see how very different the portrayal is.
Yeah. God, that must be such an incredibly surreal experience. I don't know if you watched it directly yourself or saw all the secondhand, but to like see your story told through the most sensationalized sort of third-party frame must be.
It feels really weird. And the first time I watched it, and they titled it Bad Vegan, right? So I knew what the title was, but I thought they had titled it that because the tabloids had sort of portrayed me as a bad person initially. And so my thinking was they titled it that because I get it. It's sort of a catchy title. And here's the story of how I really am not a bad vegan. But in fact, they tell the story in this way where you could kind of come to either conclusion. And, it was sort of a bit of evil genius on the filmmaker's part, the way that he did it. But I mean, evil at my expense. So that was very challenging. And, I also didn't benefit from that series. And I know that they did to a huge degree. And so, that was another painful part of it, is just they had a huge payday from that show at my expense. And then I'm still left with all the debt that I had before.
Yeah.
So
How does that happen? I'm not familiar with the like mechanics of that. I mean, they were working from your manuscript, or I mean, you participated in that. You just didn't have any editorial control or economics on
right.
it.
I had no editorial control. So, I did 2 very all-day interviews. One day was 12 hours, and the next day was like another, probably most of a day. So I'm exhausted.
Oh,
And there was very little preparation. There wasn't anybody there sort of guiding me either. And so I just have this director who doesn't, he'd read some inputs. He knew what really happened, but he's sort of asking me questions about it. And then, they have full editorial control. And then I also made these audio calls for them by actually getting on the phone with the guy who, basically destroyed my life and hurt a lot of other people that I care about through me. And so I get on the phone with him to record him without him knowing for the film, for the show, so I can get some audio of him. But then they misused that, and they made it look like I was caught on a hot mic and moved my words around and everything. So they basically, changed the reality of what happened and used that material kind of in a way that, to deliberately make me look bad at the ending. And that was it's painful.
yeah.
So,
Extremely painful. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. And it leads right into sort of why I felt so strongly now writing to put my story out, that I did not want to go to a big publisher who I know. I mean, I've published 2 cookbooks with a big publisher, and that's very different. Cookbook is very different than a memoir, but I knew that I didn't want to be subject to anybody else telling me what I can and can't put in there, or how long it has to be, or, you can't say that or take this out. So I felt really strongly about wanting to have control over my story.
yeah, there's maybe no better poster child for editorial control than you, who's been through this ordeal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the book, this is sort of interesting to like layer all these events. So you're released from prison. You have almost immediately started writing this book. Then the documentary comes out a couple years later, sort of as you're still writing the book.
Yes. Yeah. I was mostly done with the draft.
Okay.
But I mean, as you know, it's a long book. I mean, fortunately, the most gratifying thing that I hear from people like almost every day is that they can't put it down, and that it moves quickly, and that it flows. It's sort of easy and fun to read. I mean, fun from this, it just moves quickly. So that's really gratifying. But it is a very long book, and it's a complicated story to tell. And I bounce back and forth in time. So it took a really long time to, even once I had an initial very long draft, to then not only cut it to make it shorter, but, moving things around, and in what order do I put things, and to kind of keep the story flowing. And then, every time you decide, okay, well, I'm going to delete this story because I don't really need it in here. But then you have to go back and find all the places you referred to that thing. It's just it takes quite a while. And all the while, I had other jobs or was working on other projects. So sometimes I'd put it down for 6 months and not even touch it. Yeah. So it's quite a process.
The editorial complexity goes up, I think, with like a square or a cube of the scope of the project.
Yes.
And you're like, how long was your first draft?
My first draft was about 300,000 words, and the final book is 200,000 words. So, the book as it's printed now is 650 pages. So it would have been close to 1,000 pages if I, included the whole shebang.
Yeah, I mean, it's editing War and Peace multiple times. And for, for people outside the industry, like a typical book is averaged closer to like 60,000 words, give or take 10,000. So this is, 3x even in final form.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big book.
Yeah, it was a real bear. So I imagine, the intensity and the intimacy and the importance of the project, like doubled, or if not 10x for you after Bad Vegan came out. You were like, oh my God, I have to control and own my story, and I have to get this right, and I have to get it out, and I have to really like correct the record, essentially, right?
Yes, yes. And I spoke to, I had people putting me in touch with agents and publishers, and it was, I mean, I rationally kind of knew that it didn't make sense. I mean, it was tough because I could have really used the money of an advance, but I just knew. And every time I had a conversation about it, I had that sort of feeling inside, like, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. So I knew that I wanted to, however possible, make it happen, to go do it the independent way.
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad you did it. I'm very glad you chose us.
Yeah, I am too. I had all the good feels when we had our conversations about it. And yeah, I remember I was listening to a podcast with David Goggins, and when he mentioned in the podcast, and I'd already read his first book, and when he mentioned that he almost signed a deal and then kind of pulled back and did a bunch of analysis and decided to go independent, and then he went with Scribe. But when I found out that he did that, it made me feel so much better, because I thought, oh, okay, if Goggins did it, then, I feel better, than this. I feel even more validated that this is the way that I want to go. And I knew too, he would have done a very thorough research. And so that's kind of how I came to Scribe.
Yeah, it worked out well for him. And I think this is such an interesting, fun, and like unique book for us we do a lot of nonfiction. We do a fair amount of memoir, but like this is a very interesting, I'm not sure how you would describe it to people, but like from my view, it's a very interesting combination of like memoir, true crime, and like psychological thriller.
Yes, that's a very good way to put it. I'm going to use that now. Memoir, true crime, and psychological thriller.
Yeah. There's just so many different things. And part of the length of the book, I think, is a sort of a device that shows you how deep and convoluted the rabbit hole that you personally went through is. Like, you give the reader the experience of being sort of slowly lost in this like cult of one, as you put it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I debated, I cut as much as I could, but it got to the point where I realized if I cut it anymore, I would lose that element of, exactly as you described, that it kind of takes the reader along the ride with me. And if I didn't do it, if I didn't leave it the way that it was, and I sort of took out much more of, what's interesting is that I was able to recover a lot of my actual digital communications with this man. Not all of them, but enough that there's a lot there. And so I include a lot of it. And I think that it's really important to read his words. And sometimes even when he gets repetitive and he's sort of drilling this sort of stuff into my brain, and you see what I was subjected to over time. And I realize that there is an element as a reader where you're sort of deep into the last, into the 3/4 of the way in, and the reader is probably like, oh my God, again? Oh my God, he's doing this again? He's saying this again? But that's, they're really getting the experience of what it was like. And I think had I tried to make the book, half as long or cut out too much more, you would miss that and kind of miss what the experience was like.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, like how this is the kind of creative sort of project, the honesty of it and the uniqueness of it feels really difficult to drive through traditional channels. And so I believe that like a breadth of creative expression is like really important philosophically. And so whenever we get to do a book that's like, there's no book like this, like that's such a satisfying feeling.
Yeah, I like that you said that. That's cool. 'Cause yeah, I kind of would have a hard time thinking of a book to compare it to. I mean, maybe there's other people who've written memoirs about being in a cult, but this is a bit different. And there are a lot of elements. I'm well aware of sort of, in terms of the saleability of the book and the appeal, it's like there's a little bit of like celebrity stories in there, and there's a glimpse into the restaurant world, and there's sort of different elements involved. But one thing that it's just interesting now that it's out there and I'm getting a lot of feedback, but a number of people have told me too that there were places where they laughed out loud, and that it was a bit of relief, which is kind of exactly what in real life, it's like even while he's kind of torturing me many times, via this digital communication, I would I would make like stupid jokes or just because it's a coping mechanism. And I think when you're reading a difficult story, to have these moments that are sort of ridiculous or funny, it provides relief. And so, I mean, I appreciate that in films as well. If you're
Yeah.
watching a difficult scene and then something sort of funny happens, it's a bit of psychological relief. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm I'm gratified that people are appreciating that too.
Yeah. Refreshes the palate. Yeah. So tell me about the writing process itself. I mean, like sort of maybe what you expected going in. You'd done books, you'd built businesses, but you'd built cookbooks before, and so this memoir was like a very unique kind of project. Did you have any background in writing, creative writing? Like, just give us a snapshot of like Sarma on day one of book writing.
I mean, in my prior life, I'd written a blog, but I would write not very often, but when I did, I would write very long posts.
Mm.
So, and my cookbooks were a bit unique in that, especially the second one, which I wrote on my own, there was quite a bit of sort of narrative in there. So sort of used to writing, but yeah, never written a book or a memoir. And I think, you know, I think the process of writing it is therapeutic in that if you've been through something traumatic, especially something that's hard to understand, it's not straightforward. Going through the process of writing it feels as grueling as it can be to kind of relive those moments and try to sort them out in your head. On the other side of it, there's relief because it's like now you've written it down and you can kind of move past it.
Yeah.
And that feels really good. So, sometimes I tell people, like, even if you're never going to publish it, writing out what happened to you, there's a lot of value there. But there were, a lot of times where I'm working on it and just felt like, I think I even wrote in the book at some point that working on it, I sometimes felt like, I don't know, like crawling up the wall and slithering out of my skin. Like I just didn't want to be doing it and in it. And it felt really, really uncomfortable. And of course that makes all of the thing, people kind of classically tend to procrastinate writing anyway. If you just have to write an essay, it's like easy to procrastinate because you just don't want to do it. It's hard to write sometimes. And then add in the factor of how unpleasant it is and having to go back into this really disturbing, dark stuff. It made, like, procrastinating was super appealing. Anything to do something else other than working on this. So, I mean, there were parts of it that were really fun to write. So I
Yeah.
really enjoyed writing sort of the parts where I go back and I talk about the early years of the business and some stuff from college and my early career in finance and the early days of building the business. And a lot of that stuff was really fun to write. So I got to balance that with the darker stuff.
When you're writing, do you get like an immediate catharsis, or do you feel like you're just making steps towards that and the catharsis actually happens on the recognition of someone else? Or is it just like confronting it and writing it down that's satisfying in itself?
I think it's confronting and writing it down. Maybe in my case, it's different because there's this whole element of kind of wanting my truth to come out because it's been told incorrectly and I've been publicly judged for it. So there's already this sort of public perception. And now I'm getting to put out the real story. So, there's definitely feels gratifying to be able to put it out there and have it be read by other people. But even if I, you know, wrote it and never published it, it I think it's even proven to be therapeutic. I
Yeah.
think Andrew Huberman did a whole podcast about this where if you journal about really traumatic stuff, it brings somehow they study this psychologically and it like actually brings you relief if you write about what's
Yeah.
most painful. And I think that makes sense. It's like you're getting it out of you and onto the paper. And then it's out of you, it's on the paper. It's not living around inside your body and nervous system as much. So you feel
Yeah.
relief no matter what.
Yeah. Get it out of it's just been bouncing around in your head for so long, getting tortured. Just
Right. Or
pressure release.
as Bessel Vander, whatever his name is, would say, he wrote that book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is like one of those books that still appears on the bestseller list so many years later. But, I think his book argues that it kind of lives in your body too, in your nervous system.
Yeah. So how did we, now that we're looking at the book as a published thing, your 8 years of like creative challenge and effort and grind are over, how close is what's out there now to your initial vision going in, and how did the book sort of transform through the process?
The book itself, or yeah, I mean, I'm very happy with the book. I'm happy with, the physical thing. That was one of the things, like weighing the pros and cons of going independent versus a big publisher. One of the things on the con side, which there weren't a lot of them on that side, but one of them was that worry about what it's going to look like physically. And I'm very happy with how it looks. And what's funny is a friend of mine came over and we did a photo shoot, and in some of them I'm holding the book, and so he started telling me, can you throw the book? And I was like, what? And he wanted me to throw the book like sort of towards him, but right behind him. And so we got these really cool pictures where the book is like suspended in the air in front of me. But to get those pictures, I threw the book like 30 times and it hit the wall really hard, and it's survived it fine. Like I was very gratified that it survived being hurled against the wall 30 times, and like the binding didn't break, nothing. So yeah, I'm very happy with the book. I'm very happy with the cover, and yeah, I'm very pleased with that part of it. The process of putting it out there is different than I expected, only from my own personal side, in that I was going to be relaunching my business and sort of had timed it, had been originally thinking that the timing would be that I would relaunch my business. The book would come out at the same time. I am doing another docuseries, which is in progress, but that's something that wouldn't come out for, probably, I don't know, maybe a year from now, maybe less, maybe more, who knows. But that timing didn't quite work out as I expected. But yeah, now once it's out there, it's like, all right, now it's just this ongoing process of do another podcast that leads to another thing, do another bit of promotion, do a this, do a that, do an event. I'm not doing it according to the traditional, models where authors come out with a book and sort of do a bunch of events right away, which I always thought was weird because I did go to some book events. Kind of, I mean, I would like to go to those things generally, but I sort of went just to kind of think about it. And what's weird is that, it's like publish, pub day, book event. And so you go to the event, but the book has just come out, so nobody's read it. And you're sitting there listening to the author do a reading and talk about it, but nobody in the audience has read the book unless, they were able to get an advance copy, but nobody in the audience has read the book. So it's like a weird, like, why would you have an event when nobody has been able to read the book? It seems kind of weird to me. So, like I just locked in an event at a bookstore near my sister's house in Vermont for September. But yeah, I'll just keep sort of doing events and things. And yeah, now it's like an ongoing job of promotion, which is...
Yeah, it's the final marathon. I would say like the first marathon's writing it, the second marathon is publishing it, and then your never-ending third marathon is promotion and awareness.
Right. But it's nice because, the work is done. The book is out there. So the promotion is just an ongoing thing that can be done at any pace. And so, yeah, I have sort of podcasts scheduled. It's sort of spread out. And
you're getting great feedback that you can kind of roll into additional promotion and reviews and things like that. And your story is so unique, and you've got other hits coming between the business. And I mean, people are still watching, the documentary, for better or worse. And so there's just perennial interest in this sort of thing, and, having new perspectives on it, new information on it, like there will be endless curiosity. And so you'll have a ton of opportunities, I think, for years still to promote the book, correct the record, get your story out there. And
yeah. And I think, what's gratifying is that it's not just kind of here's an entertaining story to read, but here's a story that I know feels really validating for a lot of other people. Because one of the things that I learned through everything that happened to me is just how common it is. And it's something that isn't talked about a lot because it's humiliating to be psychologically manipulated, and it's something that most people don't understand. So when it happens to people, whether it's in a relationship or a group dynamic or however it happens, or it's like a family member, it's very isolating. But I just know that it's been really helpful for a lot of people who've been through this to read my story. And then the other part that feels good is that I hope that a lot of people will, especially younger people who read it, will go forward in life and be that much more likely to recognize the signs if somebody comes into their life and it starts to be manipulative and weird. And, having read my book, maybe they'll recognize what's happening sooner and avoid it.
Yeah. Well, as you point out, I think, a few times here already, like it's very difficult to empathize with somebody from that third party point of view. Like people who watch the documentary, some of them empathize, but maybe it's only the people who've had near experiences or somebody in their
Exactly.
life go through it. And otherwise it just feels like, oh my God, that would never happen to me. Most people, I think, come in with that mindset. So if your book can help people empathize with this as a state and inoculate them, hopefully, against it and keeping others in their life from falling, into these kind of things. Like this is life-saving work.
Yeah. And then there's a third sort of element of usefulness that feels really good too, which is if somebody's been through this and they're in that situation, which I understand, where where they feel like their family doesn't understand. If their family then reads the book, they can go, oh, now I understand what happened to you because I read this, this very lengthy story about it. And now I see what you went through was similar to that. So that part of it feels really gratifying. And I already, I have kind of an outline for a follow-up book already. I mean, I've had it for a while, but I more and more, I know that I need to write that follow-up book too.
What's that?
Well, I mean, believe it or not, I stepped into another situation. So, and one of the things that people are very curious about is my 4 months at Rikers, and I don't talk about that. I open it with when I was arrested and I was in jail for about 20 days. So I write about that part, but then I don't write about the story. Sort of comes to a conclusion and references my getting sentenced, but I don't talk about that 4 months at Rikers. People are very curious about that. But even when I got out of Rikers, I came out and my defenses were down because I had nothing but debt. I felt like I have nothing to take. I'd been through 2 situations where men came into my life and got an enormous amount of money out of me. And now here I am. It's very public. I am in piles of debt. So my defenses were down and, somebody came into my life and, craziness ensued. And then I learned it wasn't always about money. And it was much shorter, but kind of a lot of craziness there too. And some pretty interesting stories. And, I'll change names, but it's worthwhile, I think, to tell that follow-up story while also then getting to talk about, tell some of my crazier stories from my 4 months at Rikers, because I have a lot of nutty stories from that time.
Yeah.
And also a lot of, it made it easier to shorten this book, knowing that I probably will write another one. So I might have wanted to include sort of even more analysis and more commentary than I did, but knowing that I needed to kind of get it to a somewhat digestible. I mean, it felt like 200,000 words was kind of the limit. If I made it longer than that, it would have been a little out of control. So, a lot of the things that I cut out, I would be able to put into this follow-up book.
It is very hard to find the boundaries of a book. I mean, something we have to tell authors all the time is, don't put everything in one book. But it's really, a big part of the art is finding the boundaries and the definitions of where to stop writing about a particular topic or a particular timeline. And it does help, as you point out, to say, like, nothing is wasted. Like, you pull out that whole chapter and maybe that's the start of your next book. You don't have to kill the darlings. You just have to pull them out of this particular,
Exactly.
boundary.
Just put them on hold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. We have a lot of authors who sort of come into this, it's arduous to write a book. It's hard. It's torturous. In particular, a memoir like this, where you're like confronting really hard, experiences and memories. And the thing that pulls a lot of people through is just thinking this book can save one life. Like, just kind of the paying it forward mindset of like, this might be the lifeline that helps somebody else either avoid the whirlpool or pull them out of it. And that can be super, super motivating and totally changes the frame from like, this is a success if it sells 1 million copies or if it gets on the New York Times bestseller list to like, I have an opportunity to save one life and I may not even know who that person is, but like, I'm going to put in these hours, I'm going to do this work and I'm going to,
Yeah.
just
And
do
sometimes you do know the person because I've already had somebody exit a situation after reading my book.
Really?
And and that person is very happy. And so it feels really good. But
Amazing.
it feels kind of interesting that somebody's completely changed their life because they were reading my book and started to recognize things and realize that their own situation was not a great one. And so, I've already gotten that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they reached out to you after reading it?
Yeah. I mean, it's somebody that I knew before, but not super well. So, yeah,
That's
feels
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic.
And then, I think I had conversations a while back about a scripted series. And that's another way that sort of the longer version might be useful. My original longer draft is that there's been discussions about a scripted thing and the ability to put more into that, more that actually happened, that's actually part of my story, but didn't necessarily make it into my book. That's another way that those pieces that I wrote that I didn't include in this draft can get out there.
What are you doing differently with this new docuseries that you're a part of now?
Well, it does two things. One is it's telling the story of what really happened, which again is very different than the way it was portrayed in that show, Bad Deacon. And then it's also covering my time moving back to New York to restart the business. So there's sort of like a real-time element. And then going back and kind of correctly telling the story, and importantly, including all of the analysis of how does this happen? Because that wasn't included in that first docuseries. There was absolutely zero analysis. They had, interviewed a psychologist who understands all of this stuff for a full day, but they didn't use any of it. So there's nobody in that docuseries saying, this is a thing that happens, and here's how it happens, and here's all these psychological dynamics. And there was nobody explaining it in that first docuseries. And so that as a viewer, I find that stuff fascinating. I mean, I've watched other shows where, I don't know, the Fire Festival one on Netflix is a good example where they tell this kind of crazy story. And the whole time I'm wondering, okay, when's the psychology, when's the analysis of what was really going on in this guy Billy's head? Like, did he think that that's what I find fascinating? And there was none of that. It was just sort of like, look at this train wreck. And so we'll include the part that is, I believe, really fascinating and all of the analysis so that people can understand and actually learn something about, what are the psychological dynamics at play that, all kinds of things from dissociation and cognitive dissonance and the way that they sort of tap into your emotional system and bypass your rational thinking and then putting you into a state of fear, which also compromises your rational thinking and all of the things and then what are the conditions that need to be in place for this to happen in the first place? All of that stuff, which I think is interesting, we include in this one.
That's super interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that's not always obvious when it's not there, but Netflix's sort of motive is to create the most viral, salacious content and sort of tap into that that sense of judgment that we have, or as you point out, the rubbernecking, look at this train wreck kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it probably serves them to have a sort of ambiguous end because then there's conversation about it rather than feeling like there's an end to the story. And the fact that it's presented as a documentary when it's deliberately cut as entertainment is not cool. Ethically great.
Right. No, not at all. I mean, it was really the filmmaker because they made it and then they sold it to the platforms. But he made it in a way that you can very easily see people kind of arguing around the water cooler about, oh, she was in a, no, she wasn't. And that in itself creates controversy. But yeah, it was, I think it was made and probably appeals to that whole genre of people that are into watching true crime, where you are kind of watching train wrecks. And I don't know. I don't understand that appeal because I don't
'Cause you've
like
been in a
watching
train
that
wreck.
stuff. I've been in the train wreck. I don't want to watch it. I don't want
Yeah.
to, emotionally put myself in those places again. But if there's something to learn and there are valuable stories and there's takeaways, then it's worthwhile. So hopefully that's what we're doing with this next one.
As an author going through the kind of whole creative experience, what was the high point and what was the low point?
I mean, the low point, I guess, was probably just having to go, having to relive some particularly grueling things. And, and then not only once, but then you're editing it over and over and over again and reading it again and again. So that was probably the most difficult part. And I think the high points just, I don't know, finishing it. No, it's not too obvious to say. I mean, it, finishing it and also just having people get value from it, is really gratifying, and feeling like I put something out there in the world that will allow people to have more empathy for other people who've been through the situation, or to feel less alone if they've been through it, and less, stupid. Because what happens is when you go through something like this, people don't understand. How could you be so stupid? How could you believe that person? How could you? How could you? And so to read somebody else's story, I don't know, makes a lot of people feel less alone. So I think that's really gratifying.
Yeah. I was going to ask, I think you've had a few good answers to this already, but maybe there's more. What are some of the unexpected good things that have happened as a result of getting this book out there in the world?
I don't know. I'm hoping that there are more unexpected good things to come. And I think that because the way that I have a bunch of podcasts sort of in the works. So I'm just gonna keep going, and one thing will lead to another, to another, to another. And yeah, I guess I look forward to
Seeing
more of
more of those
those.
pile up. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like you've saved a life already. You're getting great feedback on the book, about the reading experience, about the dark and the light.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, I say this, but it feels so, so, so good that I keep hearing from people that they can't put it down. And also, so another thing is that I didn't do the audiobook yet. At
Mm,
some point I'll do that, but I haven't done it yet, which again is just I'm not doing it, and I'm sort of doing it in differently than in so many ways that traditional publishing happens. But so I've heard from a fair number of people who've said to me they don't read books anymore because I think so many people's attention span or ability to sit and read a book and focus has been compromised because of our world of the way that we exist now with social media, all the stuff coming at us. But so the point is that a lot of people would tell me that they don't read books anymore and they don't have the patience and attention
yeah.
span for whatever reason have been able to read this.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, it's the first book I've read in years, and they're reading it, enjoying it, and getting through it. So that feels really good too. I wasn't expecting that.
That is amazing, especially for, a big book. Like it's not a quick read, but I do think it's a beach read. Like it'll get its hooks in you and
Yeah.
pull you
I mean,
through.
I like to tell people that it's kind of like you're just reading two or three books that are
Yeah.
just bound together,
A
right?
series.
Because,
Yeah.
I mean, I've read some really long books too, and there is this element of like, it's kind of a slog, certain books, or when it's heavy or it's hard to read or it's hard to follow. And I think, fortunately, the pace of the reading the book flows, and it's easy because it sounds like my voice. It's just, you don't have to like focus really hard to understand
Yeah.
what I've written. It's just as if I'm telling you a story. So it moves very quickly. And yeah, so it feels
Yeah.
good in that way. It's just like a couple of books bound together as opposed to like reading Crime and Punishment or something.
Yeah, well, those long books or even series are so satisfying, partly because my favorite example of this is Shantaram. Like, it covers 10 years of a very full and fascinating life. And so when you finish that book, you feel like you've lived a whole nother life. And it's a really immersive experience when you spend, so many hours with someone. It's just a different thing than, breezing through, another Bridgerton novel or whatever it is.
Right. It's funny, I have that book. It's in my to be read sort of, not quite pile, but I have to be read books everywhere. And that one's in them.
Oh, just read the first page. It's my favorite first page of any book I've ever read.
Oh yeah, I think I have read the first page, but I think I wanted to read it, but right now I'm probably reading the most different books at the same time because a bunch of other people have sent me their books, and then I've become friendly with other people who had the same pub day as me.
Yeah.
And so that's fun. It's sort of like you link up with these people and you're promoting each other's books, and that's been really fun. But then you want to read those books really quickly. So I've got a lot of books that I'm reading at the same time, and so I haven't read that. But one other thing that I would say that was a little bit different than expected is, and other people who've put out memoirs have told me this, is that you feel like really uber vulnerable, when it comes out. Like it just feels, I mean, I don't know if it was sort of psychological, but I developed this like sty on my eye right on, and I again, good thing I didn't have like these public events scheduled because I had this really unattractive sty on the bottom of my eye right when it came out. And I mean, I've talked to other people who have said the same thing, that you just feel very, 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 very vulnerable. And like you just kind of want to crawl under the covers. And so it's weird because you're celebrating and you're excited that it's out there. But at the same time, part of you just wants to sort of curl up in a little ball and hide under the covers. And you just feel very exposed.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like a clone of you walking around naked all over the world, and you are not sure that you,
And you're not like feeling hot either. You know what I mean? It's like you're like naked and pale, and it's cold, and you're shivering, and your hair is matted down. It's not like an attractive. It's like you feel super vulnerable, and like, are people going to accept me? Yeah, you just feel very vulnerable. So that's something I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you can do to be ready for that, but I've talked to other people who put out memoirs that were not nearly as kind of deeply personal, and I've heard that same thing. And even from, I listened to a podcast with Christy Brinkley talking about her memoir and her having this panicked feeling when it was coming out that like, oh my God, is anybody going to care? Is anybody going to read it? Is it just going to sit there in piles and nobody's going to buy it? And I thought, oh, she felt that way too? So I think it's pretty universal if you put out a memoir that you feel really super vulnerable and exposed.
Yeah. All books are personal, everything with your name on it is personal, but memoirs, I think, are a whole nother level of like, especially this kind of like extremely honest, you feel like there's already sort of a jury around you. It just takes a crazy courage. So I appreciate and salute the artist's courage that it took to finish this book and get it out there and carry the flag and do everything that you're doing to promote it and help all the people that you're helping by getting it in their hands.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to do it all over again, but it won't be nearly as grueling to write the second one. I think it'll be a lot smoother and more fun, but yeah, it's something I really want to do.
Yeah. Once you've been through the maze once, you at least, I don't know if it's faster, but at least that there's an end to the maze,
Yeah, well, I mean, what the process is. And then I think importantly for me, what was really hard about writing this book is that because of all of the dissociation, there was so much that I don't remember. And it was just really painful to try to go back there, and a lot of work to try to piece things together, and like looking at my Instagram timeline and emails and G-chats and texts and trying to figure out, and then not remembering in what order things happened. And so having that sort of trauma-induced dissociation, that made it really, really hard to write. That was just like another layer of difficulty. So with the second one, I won't have that. I remember everything. I have a lot more documentation that's straightforward, and I feel like with that element removed will make it move a lot quicker and smoother.
Yeah, that makes sense. As we look forward, so we're recording this like mere weeks after the book has come out, so everything is still very fresh. You've just kind of crossed that threshold. but I really like to kind of project out, 5 or 10 years, whatever is a comfortable time frame for you. What are you hoping that your sort of life looks like in 5 or 10 years, and how does this book play into that?
Well, as I mentioned, I was working on restarting the businesses, and that has been a much different process than I thought, but I think ultimately might work out for the best. So, but the way, so ideally I've been, I've got my business back up and running, which, you know, the the people, the people who appreciated it and loved it before really, 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 really want it back. I mean, every day I hear from
Yeah.
people, "Oh my God, would you please reopen? I want your products back." And in a market now where it even makes more sense than it did before in terms of people being into very clean eating and clean ingredients. And and then there's this added layer of people who never experienced the business, but they want to because of what they heard about it and have seen about it. And then there's just this element of, I can't tell you, I mean, it means so much to me, but also daily I just hear from people, this is like people in my DMs telling me they're rooting for me, and that it's so inspirational for them to see me go through what I did and to then stand back up and rebuild. So I feel like there's a lot of support for this to happen, and it's kind of a no-brainer to do it. And then coupled with a docuseries coming out and, you know, maybe a scripted version of the story. Like, I just want it to be useful. It's what I've wanted all along, is for what happened to me and my story to be useful. So I think it can all come together in a really nice way. And so hopefully that's where things are in the future. And then I've got the second one out or coming out. And yeah, that's hopefully where I'll be.
That's amazing. I mean, that's the hero's journey, right? Like you build something up, you see it torn down or taken away, and you have the strength to get up and build it all over again and prove that it wasn't luck, it wasn't timing. You can do it with, you can do it the first time, and you can do it with a headwind. And that's the human condition, is like trying to overcome the obstacles that fairly or unfairly come across our path. And when we see people living that, I feel like it's just this natural human instinct to like pile in behind them and support them and help them rebuild and take some inspiration from it, and believe that that person represents the best of each of us.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do sometimes, it's part of how I get through difficult things is I look at what's happening in the context of a story. And so, something that seems like kind of a devastating setback, I look at it and I immediately go, oh, I can project forward in this story where
Mm.
I'm looking back going, I'm so glad this thing came apart because that person clearly wasn't right for this. And so in the future, I'll be like, whew, I'm so glad that fell apart and that person is now out of my life. And now I'm in this much better situation and it all worked out. So I just project forward. And, whether that's a coping mechanism or a rational way to think about it, it certainly helps to think about, as you're going through stuff, it being part of a story. And I've had that in kind of surreal ways too, where even when I was in jail, I sort of had these moments like, oh, I should remember what's happening right now because it's so, funny or interesting or something that I could see being really compelling on a screen. So I need to remember this because one
Mm.
day it's going to be on a screen. I've had a lot of those moments.
That's very interesting. I think that's totally rational, if not like, and even if it's not rational, it's useful. It's a useful
Yeah.
belief. There's like classic fiction advice is like, create lovable characters and then put them through hell.
Yeah.
And you see those, the challenges, the obstacles is what develops the character, whether it's, fiction as you're writing or an experience that you're living and going through yourself. And it's our job to persist.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So how, I'm deeply honored that you chose Scribe and that we got to publish this book and play a part and be that kind of partner for you in like really owning your story in every creative decision. That's like a core principle of ours. But and I'm just curious, as honest, honesty is the only helpful way to answer this question. But just like, what was your experience like, working through this book with Scribe as a partner, going from rough draft to published book?
Yeah, I mean, I can say with all 100% honesty that it was great every step of the way. Like, I can't, like, if it was just you and me and we're not on a podcast and you're like, look, just tell me, like, what could we have done better?
Which
I'd
I
be
have
like,
done and will do.
right. I would be like, I don't know. I can't think of anything. Like, I really had a great experience and felt very, very supported and very, very, very happy with the level of, you know, from the editing to the cover design, the whole process, the level of, I don't know, the quality of the people and the whole process. And I know, having gone through with a major publisher the process twice before with a cookbook. Yeah, I feel really, 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 really pleased with the whole process. And I think it just, yeah, I mean, having control over all aspects is so, so, so gratifying. And the timing as well, because with a major publisher, it's like, typically it's like when the manuscript is finished to like, oh, it'll come out in a year from now, or a year, basically to be able to do it at whatever pace you want is super gratifying. And then obviously to be able to control the process going forward in terms of, pricing and paperback versus hardback and audiobook and all of that. I think you did a really good podcast with somebody, and then there's a Tim Ferriss podcast out there that I have saved that I send to people all the time, where they go through sort of the structure of traditional publishing and how the incentives of the big publisher and the author are completely misaligned and even at odds. And so, I for one think that the whole industry is going to be changing pretty dramatically.
Yeah, I think the environment favors the self-publishers. I think Hugh Howey is that the
Yes.
Tim Ferriss podcast.
Yes, that's a really good one. I have it saved, and whenever people ask me about traditional publishing versus independent publishing, I send them that episode.
Yeah, and my episode with Paul Millard. Yeah.
Exactly, that's the other one I have saved. Yeah, both of those are great. And my stepmother's a writer, and I was at an event where she had a lot of her sort of writerly friends, and I was in the process of working on this book, and they're like, "Oh, who's your publisher?" Like, you get that question all the time. And then when you say that you're doing it independently, it's not, one of the big names. You get this look very often like, "Oh," and there's this immediate judgment where they sort of look at you as if, like, there's this immediate assumption that you couldn't get a publisher. Yeah. Like you couldn't get a publishing deal. And it's like, no, I could have gotten a publishing deal, but I chose to do it this way because I'm playing the long game and, for all the reasons that we've already talked about. So I hope that that'll change over time too, because that judgment doesn't feel good.
Yeah, it's kind of, oh, you didn't go to an Ivy League school? It's like, no, I got a full ride to Berkeley. Like, sorry.
Right. Right. Exactly. And so, yeah, and people, you try to clarify without being kind of obnoxious about it. But I wanted to say, like, no, I chose to do it this way. I could have gone to a bigger publisher. I could have sold my book. But, I also turned down a deal with a major studio for the scripted rights for similar reasons, just because I felt like, A, the timing wasn't right, but also I would have been completely letting go of all control of the story. And I don't want to do that again. I would rather hold out for, like, I think if it's going to be done in a scripted way, it can be done really, really, really well. And it needs to be, again, useful and sort of not, anyway, either way. So I sort of did that where one might have thought, oh, why wouldn't you take that deal? But for me, I'm sort of in the long game where holding on to sort of more control sounds like you're being a control freak, but I view it more as protection. Like, I'm protecting the story. I'm protecting I was very much like that with my business. The reason why there were a lot of outside investors that I didn't want to engage with was because I wanted to protect the integrity of what we'd created. And so it's kind of a similar feeling here, as I want to protect the integrity of this versus it being like, oh, she's a control freak or she wants to have control/power. No, it's more about protecting the integrity of it and making sure that it's going to be maximally useful.
Well, and the creator's vision. Committees rarely make good art, and that's what you're doing when you sell the rights and when you sign up with a big publisher, what you're doing is giving, layers and layers of people, some of whom you may never have met, veto power over your creative decisions, essentially, especially with something so personal as this, or when you have such a clear vision. That's, you're giving up a lot for that money. They say you're selling your book for a reason, and you're selling your book in many cases before many decisions are made that you may want to make.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, even people don't realize that, publishers have control over what the cover looks like. I mean, it's especially for a memoir, like how could you sell that to somebody else? And I'd watch other authors too going through, like the book tours and doing all the grueling promotion, and the beneficiary of that is mostly the publisher. I mean, the author is too, but the publisher is benefiting from all of that work, all of that ongoing promotion that you're going to be doing more and more and more and more. Doing it this way, I'm the primary beneficiary, which is useful because I still got all that debt from the past to pay off. So
yeah, and you got businesses to rebuild. I'm going to beg you and publicly and privately continue to beg you to do an audiobook. It is a shocking % of my book sales personally as an author. It's so much higher than I anticipated, and it's been growing. And I think there's a lot of people for whom, if they hear book, they search in Audible or whatever. And if it doesn't show up in that app, the book may as well not exist to them. And they are a listener, not a reader, as an archetype. And so that is a really it's an important piece.
Yeah, I really, really want to do it. It's mostly just expense at this point.
Yeah.
But I might have worked out I might have a good option for a studio space. And, my book will take a long time. I think also audio is where the length is an advantage.
Yeah.
Because as somebody I'm on the Audible plan where you get like 1 credit every other month. So you want to make that credit. Like I'm way more likely to buy, I listened to the Walter Isaacson, Elon Musk memoir, and like those 20-hour books is like a bargain when you use your credit for that. So I think in Audible, a long book is an advantage.
I agree. I've heard Brandon Sanderson say the same thing, actually. It's so funny.
Right, because you don't want to waste your credit on like a book that's 4 hours that you're going to listen to in one thing. You want to get your money's worth.
It's so funny. That's the opposite of like people are intimidated by long physical books, but they feel like they're getting a great value from long audiobooks.
Exactly. And I think there will be some fun options in terms of the voice of the Mr. Fox character and how I can do that, whether it's a male actor or his actual voice or AI. And there's also certain freedoms publishing this way where I might be more willing to make certain choices that a big publisher might, their attorneys might say, oh no, you can't do that. Where I'm like, no, it's fine. It's fine. Really, that person's going to come sue me. Bring it on. Bring it on. Like, I'm fine with it. So that's another area where having the freedom to make certain creative choices is really meaningful.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Sarma, this is always my sort of closing question. Do you have any advice for authors who are just starting out or considering starting out on their first book? As somebody who's just climbed the mountain.
I don't know. I mean, maybe like I'm very late to Substack. So I started a Substack, and I think getting into that habit of writing posts and writing, especially if it's advice for somebody who's going to write a memoir, getting used to kind of writing about yourself and your own experience is certainly helpful. And also in Substack, you can it's a bit of practice. So, and then also once the book is out, it's useful because there are a couple of sort of complete chapters that I removed, like completed chapters, just took the whole thing out. And so I might be able to kind of put those into Substack. And I think that's a good way to sort of start practicing. People have been asking me I always tell people to read Mary Karr's book about writing memoirs because she's, I think, one of the greatest memoir writers. And I quote from that book in my book. So Mary Karr's book about writing memoir is great. And and I think writing it sort of with the idea in your head, not thinking about the final product and how it's going to be received, but just writing your story as if you're telling, a best friend everything that happened is kind of the easiest way to get through it and to think about it. And also just writing that first draft is probably the hardest part. I actually kind of sometimes very much enjoy sort of the editing process, but it's that initial writing part that's painful. And then I found I use Scrivener, which
Mm,
I quite like. I don't use it. I don't know how to use all the functionality there, but especially when your story isn't necessarily linear and you might want to move things around a lot, Scrivener is really useful for that writing software for like taking chunks and moving them around. And then at some point you got to kind of pull it out and then kind of keep it only in Word. But I found Scrivener really, really, really helpful, especially when you're potentially kind of rearranging sections and moving them around.
yeah. Love it. All fantastic advice. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for putting it out into the world. Thank you for giving us a
Yeah,
chance to be your partner in this. We're very proud of you and proud of the book.
I'm so very happy. And I made a website where I put photographs because, putting pictures in a memoir, that would add
Mm,
a lot to the printing cost. But because I have so many photographs, I made a website, which
clever.
confession, I haven't finished uploading all the photos. Whatever. Again, I guess I'm just doing it my own way. But yeah, I mean, the website is just the title of the book. And then there's sort of a list of chapters, and you can kind of click on each one, and there's corresponding pictures to what I write about in that chapter, which I don't know, I haven't seen anybody else do that. So
Very cool. And pulls it into like, makes the seemingly surreal feel even more kind of real and present and shows the truth of everything that you went through.
yeah, and I think it's just kind of fun because when I'm reading memoirs, I very often start
Yeah.
Googling the people and want to see who they are and what they look like and the various people that are in that story. So I just made it easier for people when they can
And
look
if you're like,
online.
did this really happen? He's like, yeah, here's a photo.
Yeah. Oh, I have all my receipts. I mean, you know, my book has a lot of original journal entries and G
Mm,
chats and text messages and emails and, and I have all of that backup. So I
incredible.
definitely, if somebody questioned anything, I could be like, "Oh, nope, I've got the receipts."
I love it. What an incredible undertaking, and I'm so excited to see over the next few years the whole Sarma Empire get rebuilt from restaurant to book to new docuseries, and see how many lives get touched by the work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.